good to see you. I don't remember the last time we talked was at least 4 years. I don't know, 4 years ago, something
Well,
like
when we were together in person, yeah, we met during just after lockdown in France kind of lifted. So it was May, maybe May of 2020-ish. So about 4 years.
that.
Almost, wait, almost close, getting closer to
Almost
5 years,
five.
4.5 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you look the same. All this walking, all the time spent in the sun doesn't seem to have aged you very much.
I've aged a little bit. Yep, I've definitely be it living outside, the long walk from Canada to Los Angeles, being outside so much. It's definitely been taxing on the body, but it's also been very rejuvenating on the body at the same time.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're able to stay safe in all the fires. Like, how did you must have arrived in LA just when that was happening, right?
Actually, I was just a little ways out from Los Angeles when the fires began, and I was scheduled to arrive in Los Angeles on January 16th,
Mhm.
and I was in Santa Barbara, I believe, when the fires began, which was I was about a week out. And so I held out in Santa Barbara and Ventura for some time, to, you know, I didn't want to arrive in the community when it was in such a state of struggle. Um, and I thought it would be best for me to wait a little bit, considering the experiment that I'm doing is sort of unique, and I didn't want to be doing something that would be taking away from the empathy that was needed for everybody's that's here and struggling. And so I waited a little while, about 10 days or so, and arrived on January 26th, 5 days ago.
Cool. Where are you exactly right now?
At this moment, I am in Griffith Park in Los Angeles. The observatory is just up the hill from here, and this is basically my home for the next few months. I arrived in Los Angeles having walked from Canada. And when I arrived here, I gave away every single possession that I had. Every possession I had was on my walking cart. And then I gave away the last of my money as well. And so I am now day 5 into the experiment of owning nothing and having no money, with the big question being, while having nothing and while having no money, can I give more to society than I receive? And can I break down some of the societal norms and structures, the judgment that I receive of being, a drain or a mooch on society? Can I actually be the opposite of that, a deeply contributing member of society while operating far outside of so many of the societal norms?
Cool. So yeah, can we take a step back and can you um tell us about the walk? Like,
Yeah.
what was your idea there, and then what was the plan, and how did it play out in a sentence or two?
In a sentence or two.
Or 10, however many you need.
Well, the idea is simple. I decided to walk from Canada to Los Angeles, and while doing it, simplify my life down to everything I own being right there with me that I could carry. An opportunity for me to deeply slow down and simplify my life, come into the present moment, and bring integrity into everything that I was doing. And before arriving in Los Angeles, sharing everything in my mind that I was guarding or hiding, every secret that I had, so that I would arrive here having no secrets, nothing to hide, nothing to guard, just having an open mind, a mind that was just fully open to the world and to the public, and to enter here in a state of peace and enter into the chaos and see if just by being present in this peaceful state that I gathered in the long walk, be able to be be able to be of service just by existing in a state of peace and integrity and truth and transparency amongst a lot of chaos that exists in the world today.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it took months, right? How many months did it take you to do that?
The walk was 181 days, so almost exactly 6 months. It was 1,600 miles. And I did 1,000 miles in my homemade shoes, and the other 600 miles were barefoot.
Amazing. Still amazes me that you can do that. It's crazy.
For me, that was a test. I didn't know what I'd be able to do. But for me, to be able to have walked 1,600 miles barefoot and in my homemade natural shoes, where when the soles wore out, I could simply compost the soles back to the earth, that was sort of a radical experiment of breaking free from plastic, fast fashion, and the industrial shoe system that creates billions of pairs of shoes that go to the landfill. And, most people who do long distance walks, they're throwing away a handful of pairs of shoes. And so for me, that was one thing that I was dedicated to, not leaving trash behind just to be able to simply walk down the country.
Yeah, it's amazing. So wait, did the shoes survive or are they gone now?
Yeah, the shoes survived, and I am giving them as a gift actually to a host of a podcast that I'm joining on Monday, which is Rich Roll, the Rich Roll podcast, and he's a runner, and I'm really excited to gift them to him and see what he thinks of these homemade. They're made out of wool that is felted, knitted, and then felted, and then with sewed on leather, originally using deer sinew to sew it on, and then I used some just natural fibers. So they're 100% biodegradable, homemade natural shoes.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, I've recently gotten more into running and it's a great way to spend more time outside, but yeah, I'm already worrying about how many shoes I'm gonna go through.
Mm.
But that's a whole nother story. Anyway, how did you give away your possessions? Who'd you find to take them and yeah, how'd that work?
Sure. When I arrived in Los Angeles, I only had about 100 possessions, all of which were on my push cart. And I let people know that I was going to be arriving here, and I had a gathering. And there were there were people waiting for me with joy, maybe 30 or 40 or so people, which was really good news because I needed their help. I needed them to take my stuff in order for me to enter into this experiment of non-ownership. So item by item, I took the items out of the bags. I shared what the item meant to me, what the item was. And then whoever felt drawn to that item and saw that it could bring meaning and joy to their life, or it could help them to live more zero waste, or help them with their natural personal hygiene, or encourage them to camp more and be outside. I used the opportunity to share lessons through my possessions, and all the possessions were joyously taken by people. There was one possession that nobody really wanted, and that was the walking cart, which is a baby stroller that I bought for $20, and that was very, very broken. I had to repair that thing numerous times. I'm amazed that it made it to Los Angeles. So that item, someone took and is taking it apart, recycling the metal, throwing away the plastic, and then the natural fibers that I had on there will either be composted or they'll use those. But otherwise, every single item I would say was taken with excitement and joy with just whoever the people who came out to greet me when I arrived.
Very cool. And but you still have obviously you still have the clothes you're wearing. So how's that work? How's the clothes situation gonna work?
So I gave away my clothes. I was sitting naked in the park.
Oh,
I
really?
had a palm leaf to cover myself. I gave away every item of clothing that I had. And then as I sat there naked, it was an opportunity for someone to lend me an item to cover myself up. And so this blanket was lent to me by now a dear friend named Andrew, who I didn't know, prior. And then the shirt and the pants that I'm wearing are from a guy named Ant who lent them to me. And actually, he had just lost almost everything he owned in the Palisades fire. And these were clothes that he got from a donation center, and he lent them to me. So that was a really, sweet and meaningful connection. I have a hat, which I actually got on day 3. And then the last item I have is a sleeping bag, which I have laying on a bed of pine needles about maybe about a 5 to 10 minute walk from here. So I'm borrowing 10 items I'm borrowing 5 items right now, and I genuinely do not own a single possession. And the rule that I made is I can't borrow a possession for more than 10 days. And by doing so, part of the practice is sort of shedding my identity. You know, I won't have any possessions that are like mine, even with borrowing only for 10 days. So it's an interesting part of the experiment. And another aspect of this is that I am saying I'm dependent upon other people. Like here I am, I'm in other people's clothes, and other people are bringing me food at my gatherings to meet my basic needs of food and clothing and warmth. I am dependent upon other people. And this is my way of sort of taking a radical stance against, well, this sort of extreme individualism and extreme consumerism, and saying, actually, I think that if we're ever going to solve our problems, we need to come together as a community. We need to need each other. And this is my way of very publicly saying, look, I need you. I need you to help me to meet my basic needs. And I'm going to help you to meet your basic needs, not through consumerism and not through stockpiling money, but through just deep connection, which ties into today I see one of the greatest problems we have as a humanity is separation, the belief that we are separate, and disconnection. The reality is, in this modern society where we have all the material wealth and material possessions and financial wealth, we have a great lacking that has resulted in anxiety, depression, loneliness. This is what so many people are suffering from in our society. And so this is my way of saying, actually, we can be happy and healthy with less, not with nothing. I'm not telling anybody to take it to the extreme that I have, but with so much less, and through focusing on relationships, relationships with the earth, relationships with our community, relationships with the plants and animals, and relationships with ourselves, finding a deep home here on earth and a deep home within ourselves and with our community.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And it sounds like it's not like you're saying don't use anything, don't use any objects, but you're recognizing that nothing truly belongs to any of us. Even we might use it, we might have it for a little while, but it doesn't really belong to us. Is that part of the message?
Yeah, as you said that, a hummingbird just paused for a moment, a fleeting moment right in front of me. I don't need to own that hummingbird to experience incredible joy. And so it's the same with our possessions. We have this belief that we need to own things in order to meet our needs. My belief is that instead of ownership, we can share. We all don't need an electric screwdriver. When we only use it for 5 minutes in a year. We don't need to have it sitting in our garage full of stuff. So instead, we can share. It's not about not having what we need. It's about learning to meet our needs in a way that doesn't exploit so much, extract so much from the earth. And that to me is through community, and that's through sharing. We live in a time of incredible abundance, but the incredible abundance we have is coming at the expense of earth, at the burden of the global majority of people that are suffering to create this abundance for the privileged. And so it's saying, look, let's spread our wealth. Let's decrease this wealth gap through shedding materialism, through shedding individualism, and embracing sharing, embracing connection, embracing a community way of meeting our needs.
Awesome. So I want to get into like the behind the scenes kind of Robin Greenfield, but I did want to ask real quick, like how are people, following the fires and so many people losing their homes and their possessions and belongings? How is this message fitting into that? How are they? What's the reception been in LA?
Yes, it's a very interesting time to arrive in Los Angeles and for me to voluntarily own nothing when so many people just lost everything or so much. And so I've definitely gotten from some people anger and you know feel some people feel hurt or pain hearing that message. But at the same time, what I've actually experienced much more is saying how relevant we can learn that our material possessions are not what gives us a home, that it's home comes through community. Home comes through having a home inside of ourselves. During these times of incredible loss and incredible struggle, time and time again, we see that often people look back and say that that was one of the most joyous times of their life. Why? Because the community comes together to help one another and people feel really a part of something. And I've heard that from many people. I talked to one guy, his name's Ant, and he just lost everything in the Palisades fire, like almost everything. And he said right now that it has been an incredible opportunity for him to uh, question ownership, to question his ways of existing with Earth, and he's using it as an opportunity to really pursue a deeper alignment with life on Earth. And so, it's been very mixed. The people there's a lot of people again that have responded with a lot of judgment of me, and I would even say, yeah, a lot of judgment and casting of anger. And then a lot of people who say that, my message couldn't have come at a more relevant time for the community here in Los Angeles. So you have both.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's an amazingly positive message, but I could see it being hard for some people, for people who are in that situation at the moment.
Well, the reason that my message, I'm the reason I feel comfortable being here in Los Angeles at this time is because people who have lost everything, my belief is that yes, they need material possessions. They need to meet their basic physical needs of a home, of food, of water. But just as much, people need to belong. They need to be seen and heard. They need to feel a sense of love and connection. And for me, that's my practice. My practice is empathy and compassion. And so I'm not out of place here. I'm here to be existing in a state of peace that helps others to exist in a state of peace, to break free out of the chaos, to find that comfort and that balance inside of themselves, and to exist in a state of empathy and compassion. We need that. And especially, in the political situation, you have so much of people wanting to blame others and put this yeah, the blame upon others. And I think we need people who are existing in a place of compassion and love. And that's I'm fully committed to, no matter the scenario, no matter how anybody receives me, to existing in a place of compassion and love to the best of my ability.
Yeah. What about you made one video about this during your walk, but what about law enforcement? Like how have you had a lot of run-ins with them and is that something you plan for? Like do you have a plan for those moments or how has that worked?
Well, right now is a new chapter in my experiment of simple living and living in integrity, and that is that I've committed to telling only the truth and not a single lie for the next 4 years. That's a 4 year vow that I made.
Wait,
And
what
so
happens at the end of the 4 years? Do you go back to no, no, I'm just
probably I continue it for the rest of my life, but I it's not exactly easy to exist in a full state of transparency. So I made a 4 year commitment to start rather than a lifetime commitment. And we'll see if it becomes life or not. But one of the most challenging areas with that is that if a police officer or park ranger asked me, "Are you sleeping in the park?" my answer would be yes. There is no lying, there is no hiding, there is no, like, and when I say I'm only telling the truth and not a lie, that means there's no like hiding it. It's just yes. Yes, if they ask if I'm sleeping in the park. And so if I am asked to leave, then my response would be to simply leave, or if not leaving, then having a compassionate communication, a compassionate conversation with the officer, human to human, and seeing what happens. And maybe they say, oh, actually, okay, I see that you're not a threat. I see that you're actually cleaning up thousands of pieces of garbage in this park, and that actually this park is cleaner, and the community actually can potentially have more joy because of your presence. That's what I'll do. I'll take it as it happens if the police come. Now, I have had one woman come on day 2 or day 3 who she walked right up, and I said, hey, are you here to join us? And she didn't acknowledge that she like knew who I was, but very quickly it became an attack. And I very quickly saw that she did indeed, she came to, to speak to me, and she wanted me out of the park. She had a anger um against people who are experiencing homelessness, not just me, but in general against people who are experiencing homelessness. And she came very strongly with this message of basically saying, like, I want you out of here. I want you out of this park. And I just responded with compassion, checking in with her, what her feelings and needs were. And then I was told that she went and reported me to the park rangers. And so I thought I was done for, but no issue whatsoever. The park rangers haven't come. Today's day 5. And so this is part of the radical experiment of what I've chosen to do is I'm living by earth code. Before laws, before national laws or state laws or municipal codes. I'm living by earth code, and I'm sleeping here in the park, and I am being of service while I'm here. I'm not being of harm to anyone. I'm not in the way. Nobody sees me sleeping. I'm tucked up there. And this is a really interesting aspect of my experiment of not following a law just because a law exists, but instead following earth code. And what earth code is that it's a deep level of critical thinking. It's not a black and white policy. It's deep critical thinking in that designing my life in a way that is of benefit to the earth, to the plants and animals, and to the community, and at the very least does no just unnecessary harm, does no destruction. And I have chosen to live my life by that to a very deep level. And I know that I'll have run ins with police officers. And I'm very excited for when I do, because it's just an opportunity to see them as human beings, which they are, and to practice compassionate communication, nonviolent communication, which is so deep to my core right now.
Cool, cool. So yeah, I want to talk to you about the behind the scenes kind of. You and I have worked on four or five videos together, and
Yeah.
it was amazing to work on those. But we were mostly talking about your message and the experiment that you're doing each time. And I've always been curious, like, how you go about setting those up. Like, where do you get your ideas from? How do you come up with the idea for
Hmm.
for an experiment?
Yeah, well, my ideas come from a wide range of places, I would say. It's often from uh, leaders in the world that I have an incredible amount of respect for, and figuring out how I can share their messages of integrity and connection to the earth in a way that is relevant to society now in 2025. And also looking at ways that I can share messages that a lot of people really are not exposed to, and but take on these sort of extreme projects that are designed to reach people that wouldn't otherwise be reached, and reach people who already are being reached, but help them to take it many steps further. And for example, when I did what I called Trash Me in 2016, where I wore all of my trash for a month, lived like the average person, eating, shopping, consuming, but had to wear every piece of garbage that I created to make a visual of just how much trash one person creates. That was in part inspired by Morgan Spurlock, who did Super Size Me, where he only ate McDonald's. So sometimes it's from something that I've seen, and then other times it's just a natural flow of thoughts into my mind. The experiment of non-ownership, one aspect of this is Mahatma Gandhi. I know towards the end of his life, he had only around 11 possessions or something like that. He had just simplified his needs to the absolute basics. And so, me entering into this experiment of non ownership is really just me on the trajectory of my own life of wanting to experiment with this. But me doing it here in Los Angeles in the public is me uh, embodying the practice of Gandhi and seeing how I can bring this concept of living simply so that others can simply live, which is one of the things that he says that really inspired me to the people in 2025 in this sort of radical way, with the heart of it being that here in the United States we have just 5% of the world's population, but we consume 25% of the world's resources. That's actually extreme. And so I'm only extreme because I am standing so strongly to a society that considers itself normal but is actually by definition extreme. So yeah, it comes through inspiration from the earth, inspiration from fellow humans and leaders, through brainstorming with others, and through seeing what's working out in the world and how I can adapt it to dive deep into the messages that I'm most deeply passionate about right now.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess what I was curious about is like do you start with the message you want to convey and then from there try to work out what kind of experiment would convey that the most, would illustrate that the most? I mean, because the thing that impresses me every time is that you have a very simple gesture, sort of, but I know that having a simple concept, those are the ones that usually take the most work to arrive at. So I'm
Mm,
wondering what if you even what's your thought process each time? You said you brainstorm? Do you go through
yeah.
different like iterations of it?
It's a little hard for me to pinpoint. Like for example, this experiment of non-ownership, I know that I thought about this at least 8 years ago, because I was recently reading a journal from 2016. As I was shedding everything, I was getting rid of everything digital as well, or publishing it. And I came to that 2016, I had this idea. I don't know exactly where it came from. And it took me many years to be able to get to this because it's not easy to enter into non ownership. It took years of shedding and shedding and shedding. The walk, for example, of walking from Canada to Los Angeles, that came to me on day 6 of my silent meditation, Vipassana meditation, about 1 year ago. Actually, it was about 13 months ago. Now, that's when I decided to do that walk. It came to me in that moment of clarity. However, you know, I'd been wanting to do a long walk for many years and have always been drawn to walking across the country. Forrest Gump is one of my inspirations. But, I'll give some of the credit to Forrest Gump. I don't know if I'd have done that walk if it wasn't for Forrest. Um, and I know Forrest is a character and not a real human being, but he's very real to me. He's changed, he plays a role in my life. And so I just call him Forrest Gump. But so it is hard to pinpoint exactly where they come from, uh, except that it's a constant, it's, I'm constantly thinking, how do I use my life to be of best service? You know, I don't believe starting a company that has an ethical product is it. I don't believe, I've planted a lot of fruit trees and given seeds to the people. I don't think that's it either. I actually think that the greatest gift that I can give is embodying integrity and living in harmony with the earth to the deepest level that I can, just embodying it and speaking about it, being a free human being, being a human of integrity, and just really existing in society in this bold and radical way. And so that's what I'm constantly asking. How can I use my life as my message in a way that reaches millions of people and helps some people to just make little changes and helps others to radically transform their life? So I'm constantly brainstorming, constantly thinking.
You said you keep it. Do you still keep a journal for ideas?
So I actually, once I entered into this experiment of non-ownership, I published every document that I had on my computer or I deleted it. So I actually don't have a single word, a single written or spoken word that is not Creative Commons, that is not accessible. And so I have no journal either right now because that would be something that I would own. And so right now I'm not writing except for in moments where I'm with someone who has their own notebook and a pencil and, might
Just
make some notes.
grab their notebook.
Yeah. So right now I'm not journaling. My way of spreading messages right now is through video because that's a way that I can be continuing to practice non-ownership. Every video that I put out is Creative Commons, which means I don't own it. I don't have a copyright over it. I have no rights whatsoever. I release it under the Creative Commons Universal license, which means people could even monetize it if they want. I have no ownership or no rights whatsoever to the messages that I'm sharing.
Cool. How long do you spend like planning an experiment? How much planning goes into each one?
How long I plan out experiments really varies, but I would say it's usually never less than a few months, and it's often multiple years. Now, I'm not actively planning during that time necessarily, though. Um, it might just be waiting till the time is right. And so it's often that the ideas that I have they take quite something, and it's not something I can launch into tomorrow because I have responsibilities that and operations of the organization that I've managed, the nonprofit, um, and ultimately I've been a little bit too. I would say I have been too stuck in my life has been too complicated, and so often I've had to wait time before I can do things. Right now, my objective was to simplify my life to the point where whatever's most important I could do in this moment. And that's where I'm trying to get to as an activist, where wherever I see in this moment, that's where I can be most effectively of service. That's where I'll go and that's what I'll do. And that's a big part of this deep simplifying my life is because I believe that this radical simplicity is what will allow me to be of most effective service, of highest service.
So I know you think of yourself as an activist, but you have a YouTube channel, an Instagram channel. Uh, I'm not sure which other platforms you're on, but do you think of yourself as a content creator or an influencer or not at all? Or how do you conceptualize that part of your life?
I am not easily insulted, but if you want to insult me, call me a social media influencer. Now,
I don't think it's an insult. I think you influence a lot of people in so many ways. I don't think it's
yes. However, I'm not a social media influencer. I'm a human being who uses social media as a tool to reach people. I work with newspapers, news stations, traditional media, and more of this younger, more modern media. I write, I speak, I do videos, I post on social media. Social media is just one aspect of my life, um, it, and first and foremost, I live my message, and then I share it on social media. I don't generally think, okay, what can I do for social media? I think, what can I do for my life to bring it into the highest state of integrity that I can, and then I will share this on social media. Rarely are things planned, particularly for social media, first and foremost. And so I don't monetize my social media. Social media is not a place for me to make my living. I'm not paying attention to how many followers I have. I certainly used to. I was much more focused on that. I was much more ego based. But the reality is that I take part in social media half willingly almost. I don't want to be on social media. Well, okay, I do want to, but it's a daily struggle of my integrity to do so. So it is a temporary platform for me. I do plan one day to sign off social media forever. Whether or not my platforms on there, my profiles continue and other people, utilize them, that's possible. But my intention is to sign off forever in the relatively near future, in the years ahead, most likely. A content creator, am I? I do create a lot of content and it comes in many forms, but really I just consider myself to be a human being who's living a life with a message to share. My life is my message, and I use whatever platforms in order to share that message.
I guess that was my next question. Do you think about yourself having a brand? I know you're not going to like that word, but like an image, I guess, that you want to stick to, or is it always just the message first? Like, I mean, okay, let me give you an example. I think that, of course, you're putting the message first, but over the last whatever 5 years that I've worked with you on stuff, um, even just the way you look has stayed really consistent. Like your haircut, your
Yeah.
the color of the clothes that you wear, that kind of stuff. Do you think about that at all?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about
Yes.
that.
I would not call it a brand. That would not align with what's in my soul. But I would understand people calling it a brand. One of the reasons I don't call it a brand is that it's totally unmonetized. I don't make a penny off of this. What brand exists that doesn't have a monetary aspect to it? A brand generally has a monetary aspect. Mine really doesn't. 100% of my media income is donated directly to environmental organizations. Now, some of that has come to the organization that I started, Regeneration, Equity, and Justice, but that money doesn't go to me. That money is used to be of service. So, I would say that I am operating substantially outside of what most anyone would consider to be the purpose of a brand. That said, um, it's very easy to look at me and see it as a brand. First off, most people assume that I'm making a lot of money off of what I'm doing because I could be. And so that's why they see it as a brand, because they don't see the whole back end of everything that I'm doing. But I design my life as a media package. That's what I've done since I started. When I design projects like Trash Me, where I'm wearing all of my trash, it's designed as a media package. I come up with the sound bites, the simple way of spreading the message, because that's what I am, a messenger. I ran a marketing company before I, shed all of this from 2011 to about 2014. I was a salesman for a handful of years. And so I know how to sell things and I know how to package things. And I absolutely do that. And for years, I wore simple green shirts. Green wasn't my favorite color. My last name's Greenfield. The green shirt made a lot of sense as far as for people to remember me. Because I do want people to remember me. Because why? Because people relate to people. If people, if people like me, they're much more likely to take the message deep into their heart and transform their lives. If people don't like me, what's the odds that they're going to make changes? I don't think so. They make changes because they like someone, they feel a connection to someone. So I very much have crafted an image. However, that image is me. I am at the heart of my being is to live the most authentic and genuine life that I can. And so, yes, there's areas where I haven't done that perfectly over the last decade plus. But now, as you can see, I'm wearing factory made clothing that I've borrowed from someone. It's plastic. It's a major brand. Uh, and so in many ways, I'm moving more towards shedding the identity and just embracing what is the most authentic and genuine. And, recently by sharing everything I was guarding and hiding and entering into complete transparency and truth, I mean, talk about a way to risk losing your place in society or your brand. And why could I do that? Because I'm not monetizing it. If everybody decides they don't like me tomorrow, I still have my needs met because my living is not based on whether people like me. My message and my ability to reach people may be, but not my living. And so that allows me to take extremely radical stances because it's not a brand. I'm just a human being who is really really on a mission. And part of that mission is to live in the most radically authentic and genuine state. And that's not really something that you can do well by carrying a brand.
Yeah, I think the consistency, your consistency is one of the things that's impressed me a lot, since the first videos that I saw of you. So I think that's part of what you're talking about. You did manage,
Yeah, consist.
you managed to end up with a green shirt after all. You, is
It's actually,
it
it
not
looks,
green?
it, I don't know. What do you think? Is it green?
I say it's more grayish.
It's
Red?
gray, but it
Okay.
has like this little bit of a greenish yellowish hue to it. But it's actually more like, yeah, grayish brownish. But
Okay.
you're right. It's got at least a green little hue to it.
All right, just a couple more questions. So you kind of answered this, but like when you're planning a project, aside from the ecological message, like do you have any guiding principles? Do you have any rules for yourself? Aside
Yeah.
from simplifying your life and aside from, the message that you want to leave people about how they live their lives, do you have any principles for how you plan your experiments?
Guiding principle is that it's real life, that you see the truth. So yesterday someone that I was filming with wanted to move a bottle as I was talking about the trash that I was cleaning up, and I said, no, I don't want to move that bottle. I want you to see the real situation. Not to say in the past I haven't moved things for optics, but I'm deepening into that, and I practice that to a very high level. So the truth, transparency, what it is, what I'm really doing, being honest, sharing the deep truth and transparency behind it. Integrity absolutely is at the core of all of my projects. To entertain from the beginning, my method has been to entertain, educate, and inspire, with entertain coming first because that's how I can reach millions versus, thousands, because it's easier when there's an aspect of entertainment. You fill stadiums with entertainment. To entertain, positivity is definitely at the part of it. Showing positive solutions, showing a lot of what is, not just focusing on the problem, but focusing on the solution is at the core of what I'm doing. I want people to be able to walk away from whatever they hear me say and know that there's something that they can do, not be stuck in what they can't do. So, for example, I don't really talk about climate change, but I focus on hundreds of ways in which we as individuals can make a meaningful contribution to society that also do help to alleviate climate change. But I don't even talk about climate change. I talk about what we can do as individuals to take power back. And in doing so, while acting locally, we are a part of the global transformation.
Do you have any examples of an experiment that you think didn't work, like it failed? Not, for instance, like I know there's one you canceled that we were talking about last year, but ones that
School
you
lunch.
finished, yeah, lunch. Ones that you finished or did part of, but you thought weren't a success or weren't what you were hoping for.
Yeah, there's certainly projects, campaigns that I've done that have been less successful than I had hoped. For example, when I did Trash Me Again in Los Angeles in 2022, it was far less successful than when I did it in New York City in 2016.
Oh,
However,
what? Why do you say that? Because you had like, didn't you have like a TED talk and
I did a TEDx, but as far as media coverage, there was probably at least 5 times less media coverage.
oh, interesting.
And my videos were viewed by 10, 20 times less people, probably.
Okay.
So substantially less impactful. Um, and but no experiment that I've done has been a failure. And part of the reason why is that every experiment that I've done is designed to help me to move in the direction that I'm going. So this experiment I'm doing right now, the experiment of non-ownership, it doesn't matter if a single person actually sees what I'm doing. I am benefiting deeply in bringing my life into a place of integrity and freeing myself from societal norms, and restrictive societal norms. So every project that I do is designed for me to deeply immerse in what I'm passionate about, to bring my life into a higher state of integrity. And thus, there is never a failure of any of my projects. And then, also I have released early on, I had delusions of grandeur, like in my first years of activism. I no longer have those. I've seen the great leaders that I learned from and what they've been able to accomplish. They haven't been able to solve all of our environmental and social catastrophes. So there's no belief whatsoever that I'll be able to do. All I can do is have reasonable expectations of how I'll be able to contribute to society and to go with that. And I do not believe that if only one person benefits from what I'm doing, that that's a success. That wouldn't be a success for the time and energy that I'm putting into this. But um, all I can do now is focus on living in the deepest integrity that I can. I'm no longer attached to outcome. I'm only attached to what I can control, and then outcome we'll just see what happens. And so in that way, failure is really not possible.
So for you, as long as you stick to your core beliefs, that's the key to your success, you think?
I'm moving more in that direction. That embodying my message, that my life being my message, and living in the highest state of integrity that I can, that's who I want to be. And that's partly inspired by leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Thich Nhat Hanh, where at the core it's that they are an island of peace, an island of integrity, and their job is to navigate society in that way. I'm not there yet. I have a lot of work to do. Like I'm on a journey. I've been working on this path for about 13 or 14 years, and I still have a lot of work to do in order to become the human that I want to be. But it takes time. It takes times to break free from the web of consumerism and exploitation and injustice that I was born and wrapped so deeply into. It takes an incredible amount of practice. You can't break free from that in a year or in a few years or 5 years. That takes a long time to shed all of these preconceived notions and judgments. So I would like my job in society to simply exist in this radical state, to talk, to be, to exist, and that's it. That's and to shed all attachment to outcome. That's where I'm moving towards, and at the same time, I'd like to plant, many fruit trees for the public, and I'd like to create systems of being able to provide seeds to every person who would like to start a garden, and I'd like to do more. But I've found that I've been spread thin over the last decade, and as I've done all of those programs, like we've provided seeds to 40,000 people, but as we provided seeds to 40,000 people to grow food, I lost some of my integrity because I had to be making money to do that. And that made it hard because I ended up, more involved with corporations that I didn't fully support in order to make that money because I wasn't getting it from the public. So I had to make that money that way. And so there were times when I felt like I sold my integrity, the thing that I have that is the most valuable, in order to make money to provide seeds and trees to the people. And so at the moment, I'm taking a pause from all of that, and my job is to simply exist in the highest state of integrity and to embody my message to the deepest level that I can.
Cool, cool. Um, I want to ask you one more question, and then I'll let you go. Uh, how do you go about? I know you work with a lot of different people. Um, well, you can tell me about it, but I know you collaborate. You know, you have someone who helps. Melissa helps with emails and stuff like that, and then you have other people who help with filming. How do you go about collaborating with other people? How do you make those decisions? How does that work?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
So
don't you don't see that you don't see that so explicitly in your videos. How do you go about that?
Yes, there is definitely plenty behind the scenes of my life. Partly just because most people aren't interested in all of it. It would be most people would be like, "Why is this guy telling us everything?" But I do. I am transparent about everything behind the scenes. But as far as collaboration goes, so, at the beginning of my activism, I was operating heavily from a place of ego because I was born into a very individualist based egoic society. And especially born as a white man of all the demographics, I would say we're probably some of the most egoic, individualistic based of all the demographics of people out there. And I also grew up like really having to prove something. I grew up poor, low income, Jewish in a Christian dominated place, and always just felt like an outsider. And so from my get go, I was always trying to prove something, and so that was very individualism based. I've been shedding that through creating more community designed work and more collaborative work. It's still, I wouldn't say, the utmost of my strengths. I'm still learning a lot. I'm still shedding a lot, but a lot of my collaborations are very behind the scenes. So, in providing, we've planted 2,000 community fruit trees over the last years. That's all with communities that we're planting with, providing seeds to 40,000 people. Well, that involved collaborating with organizations to provide the funding and then hiring teams of people to do the operations, me managing that. And sometimes that's volunteers. I've worked with hundreds of volunteers over the last years to build gardens, to provide resources, to create videos. A lot of my content is through collaboration. So much of my content is people who volunteer that are excited to share the message, and then some of it's people who are paid. Right now, I have a very unique way of operating in that I have a supporter who is paying the people who want to support me directly. I'm not involved in the money. There's two people that I'm working with right now, one that's doing video, and then the other that's doing just kind of running the behind the scenes of everything. And they're paid directly by this supporter. And in doing so, I'm as far removed from the monetary system as I can be while still being able to use money as a flow of resources to accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish. And then the last element that I'll share on that is that in a lot of my collaborations, I'm behind the scenes. So I've used my social media platforms to um, to highlight and support and uplift hundreds of different activists and organizations and initiatives through videos and through writing and through raising funds for them. And that's all. Sometimes I'm there with them, like using my credibility to help to uplift them, but often it's just using my platform and the credibility of my platform. For a lot of budding activists, being on a platform that has over 1 million followers it can be a huge step up for them. It sometimes changes people into like little local celebrities, having that video made that gets sometimes millions of views. They go from kind of being scoffed at in their community to all of a sudden like, whoa, there's a video about this person that has millions of views. This is actually, they become sometimes local celebrities through me using my platform. So that's another form of collaboration that I do. So yeah, a lot of the collaboration is behind the scenes, and more my objective is to build community into everything that I'm doing. And that's something that I'm working towards, and that is a challenge. And I like to work alone a lot of the times. I like to just have an idea and do it. And so that can be challenging to do sometimes as collaborations. But that's a big part of my life design, is to have everything be community focused.
Cool. Yeah, I was wondering who filmed the stuff while you were doing your walk, for instance.
While I was doing the walk, I had someone come out for a few days
Hmm.
that was paid by the supporter
Mhm.
to do those handful of videos. So I did a handful of videos in Northern California, and someone came out and filmed. And then before getting to Los Angeles, I did a couple days of filming, and that was another person who was paid by the supporter to do it as well.
Cool. So, well, it's good to hear that you're gonna find you have ways to continue making content even though you have no more possessions. Um, I know you'll
Yeah.
find a way. So,
Yes. And on that note, I'm really this is my first interview since become entering into the experiment of non-ownership, doing it over. This is my first time looking at a screen in 5 days, actually.
oh
I'm
wow,
not looking at screens for any other purpose except to do media, to spread the message. And I would love to actually publish this on my social media channels, if you'd be open to that, because this has been a beautiful way for, like, this has been a very solid conversation to share what it is that I'm doing. And what do you think about that?
yeah, yeah. I would love that too. Absolutely.
Wonderful.